Hi, and welcome back to the second episode of Housing Data Talks. I'm your host, Alison Bowles. I'm a research analyst at Housemark. I'm joined today by Steve Erdal, who is one of the co-founders and the chief scientific officer from Wordnerds, and also John Wickenden, who is the research manager for Housemark and my line manager. That's why he's got himself back on the second go already. We'll be talking to Steve about the collaborative report we've just done with Wordnerds, as well as some other really interesting things to do with AI and how robots are taking over the world. And then John will be filling us in with what's going on in the data that we've seen so far and recently from Monthly Pulse. So, Steve, thank you for joining us today. If you could just give us a quick background in regards to Wordnerds, how you all started, and a bit of your background, that'd be great. Thank you.
Of course, yeah. So Wordnerds is a customer feedback tool. We pull together lots and lots of different types of customer feedback data. We make sense of it using a mixture of artificial intelligence and some linguistics to help our customers to make their customers' lives better. In terms of my background, um, I am a recovering linguist. I got into linguistics through literature, and I was looking in literature at Scottish mythology. So, obvious step from Scottish mythology to working for a tech company. I mean, I take it you don't need any kind of further information there. But I was really interested in looking at the differences between different kinds of mythology. And I found these kind of methods of things like corpus linguistics, where you were using kind of software to try and understand the textual fingerprint, trying to understand the difference between, for example, Irish and Scottish mythology. And I was sort of doing this as a little nerdy sort of hobby, almost a little kind of pet project. And at that sort of time, I found myself feeling like the uni wasn't the place for me. I wanted to do something for myself. And I started looking at um, sort of at organizations and the way they were communicating, and looking at the differences in the same way I was looking at the Book of Lear and the Fenian cycle. And I spent a little while as a freelance linguist with all the jet set lifestyle that implies. And then I met my co-founder at Wordnerds, Pete Dakin, who was running a digital agency, so websites and e-commerce and all that sort of stuff. And he likes to say that he then dragged me kicking and screaming out of the library and showed me this thing called the internet. And we started to look at how we could take these methods and use them to understand customers at scale. At that point, that was kind of 2015, 2016. So just about when AI models first started to become a thing. So we started to unite those different ways of understanding data, but always with the view to how can we make it actionable? How can we understand what really affects customer experience? And how can we help the organizations that we work with to improve theirs? So Scottish giants to dealing with customer feedback. It's a tale as old as time.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a Disney movie, guys.
That's a very weird Disney movie.
Yeah, very weird. Very makes perfect sense, really. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Obviously, recently we have collaborated on a report in regards to the TSM figures. So just wondered if you could sort of run through any points that you think might highlight issues that landlords have, any sort of potential successes though, and think any similarities, any trends that you saw as part of it.
Yeah, we're so excited about this report. It is bringing together the TSM data from I think 18 different housing associations who volunteered their data, and we're so grateful to them for doing that. Both Housemark and Wordnerds collaborators that have come together in order to take this 135,000 TSM points and TSM comments and get a sense of what were the kind of the overarching factors, the things that were affecting the TSM score, which we're now able to use as a benchmark. So I think the big challenge that we were trying to solve with this was, we've been able to categorize data for a long time. if you hear that 3% of your customers are talking about, I don't know, rude staff,
Mhm.
is that good? Is that terrible? Or
Mm.
is that kind of roughly what you'd expect from the sector? Is that way below? Is that way up? Um, but what we've been able to create with this new benchmark is it gives you a sense of, it allows you to contextualize, prioritize differently because you have that understanding of this is how we compare to the wider sector.
Mm.
In terms of specific things, I think there's loads that I found really interesting. I thought it was really interesting the things that actually seem to affect the TSM score. So we got the TSM score along with the comment, and there was this. It was really interesting to look at what were the things that were likely to push the score up, likely to push the score down. So, for example, the thing that pushed the score up was most likely to push the score up was getting a quick response.
Okay.
So, if the customer mentioned that they'd received a quick response in their TSM survey, their TSM score went up by an average of 41 points, which is enormous, which is absolutely huge. And that's not quick repairs, that's quick response. And people saying they got back to me really quickly.
Mhm.
Um, we saw a lot of that kind of communication based stuff as being the actual things. So it's not the kind of big, expensive structural stuff. It's often the keeping promises, it's treating people with empathy and that kind of thing. And then conversely, what was dragging it down? People feeling ignored, people feeling unsafe. And I thought it was a really interesting um, way of sort of assessing how that communication and those kind of simple communication things can be really important when it comes to TSM score.
Mm. No, definitely.
Yeah, because I was thinking, in the before TSMs came out, we had the STAR survey, and it's still used in some parts of the UK. But one of the questions that didn't make it to the TSMs was in the STAR was ease of dealing with your landlord. I think the question was how satisfied that your landlord is easy to deal with. It's a question a bit like that, but that was the biggest driver of overall satisfaction. That seems to be echoed in what you're saying.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the whole kind of science of customer effort is fascinating. We tend to use a kind of four-step model for that. So four different kinds of effort that we look at in our data. You've got time-based effort, so that would be had to wait in all day for a repair person to come. Emotional effort, where someone is having to is starts to feel upset, starts to have to give kind of that kind of emotional um, uh, that's a kind of a major one as well. Physical effort, which is obviously rarer, but often when housing associations ask customers to, do something to a repair themselves, that can impact as well. And then the overlap of those kind of different types of effort was a really interesting area. The one we saw the most probably won't shock you is the kind of the time-based effort. That was about 50 odd percent of the overall kind of discussion about effort. But yeah, I think thinking about and the word used there was ease, and I think that
Mm.
is often people think about the kind of highest level of customer experience being customer delight. A lot of the time, what they actually want is customer ease. They want this to be as easy as possible. So I think it's really interesting that that was taken out of the star survey. But
Yeah, yeah, I'm not really sure. I think the regulator just had a
Mm.
finite list that they could fulfill, and that didn't make
Yeah.
the cut for some reason. But yeah,
And you're obviously with every new question you're asking, you're asking more of the person that's filling in the survey. And so similarly with rent and that kind of thing, how customers are feeling financially, that's something that housing associations are often really interested in, but doesn't tend to that isn't in the kind of the big 12 questions in the
of course, yeah, and that was another one. Yeah, the value for money of rent and
Mm.
value for money of service charges. That was in Star, but they didn't make it through. I suppose there was a with Star, it was a bit more pick and choose which
Mm.
questions you had, as long as you had a set of core questions.
Mm.
But
Absolutely.
yeah,
And I think that categorization process, that's what that can be really, really good at because um, what we do at Wordnerds is we train small AI models to go through all of the customer data, survey responses, email data, call transcripts, etc. Um, find and group people together based essentially on what they mean, based on what they're talking about, rather than, and so that then allows the customer to talk about whatever they want, and then the system can then categorize it after, rather than having to rely on answer each one of these questions so we can get a sense of how you think about this particular issue, because there's always going to be another issue that you didn't think of. And so, yeah.
So did you, with the 18 landlords that you had this report based on, was that the basis of your machine learning, or had the machines been taught before you did the 18 reps?
It's a great question. The actual AI models that we used were trained specifically on that data. So you imagine there's kind of a big AI model that's the foundation, and then separate from that, kind of built on top of it, there's a sort of smaller model where we're used. So it's just being trained on that, because obviously people talk about different things, different sectors in different ways, and understanding specifically what the way in which the words are being used in the housing data is, that's really kind of, so being able to categorize the data, train that model on that data, actually makes it a lot more kind of accurate, and gives it that sort of head start that's really, really nice.
Okay.
So it was all trained on that.
Yeah, because that was something we were interested in, whether sort of, obviously you deal with, as you say, lots of different sectors and different sort of customers and consumers, I suppose. So whether social landlords, what they get off the tenants, is it vastly different from other sectors? So a social landlord's finding that their tenants are generally feeling one way about something, which I know another sector might not be offering the same service. Do you see any sort of correlation between this sector and others at all?
It's really interesting. So I think that there's a couple of things to say. I mean, firstly, it's interesting to see. I think that the similarities are getting more similar, particularly around customer service. I think it's worth remembering as a housing association that when it comes to customer service, you are not being judged alongside other housing associations, because the tenant only has one housing association. You're being judged alongside all the other customer experience teams that you work with. We do see a lot of kind of similarities around those things, around showing empathy, around, if a staff member is condescending, that is, regardless of the sector, often the worst kind of feeling that a customer can get. We do have a big kind of range of, from people who are, luxury hotels where, all the way through to people incredibly angry because their train's late, and all these kind of different groups. But yeah, I think there are definitely, those human things are often really similar. In terms of how this sort of broader similarities and differences, I don't think what we've done here could have been done in any other sector that we work in. And I think it's a testament to housing. The fact that 18 housing associations have put their hand up to make things better for everyone, because they think this will help everybody to improve. One of our team, Sarah, has started talking about it as the Volvo moment for housing. Because Volvo invented the
Seatbelts.
the 3-strap seatbelt, yeah. So, or the 2-strap seatbelt. So they were the first people to invent that. And rather than patent it and say this is ours, and as you would expect, they said this is going to save lives, so this should be for everyone. So they gave away to for free. And I think, and there are kind of echoes in that in what goes on a lot in housing. It's so collaborative. It's you get very little of what you see a lot in other sectors, which is, if we've got something good, we want to be the only people to have it. And I think the overall idea of bringing together data from all these different housing associations and allowing the rest of the sector to use that as a benchmark to help understand, what they can prioritize, which things they can move, which things they can't, to see where they're to see their best practice. So if you're a housing association and your phone staff are better than any of the benchmark, then they deserve to know that. So being able to show the positives as well as the negatives, but that is only made possible because of this really collaborative and collegiate um, uh, environment that we see in housing. We don't really see anywhere.
No, I'd agree with that, and I'd say that from working in it as well, I think that's very much the culture that you need to have that empathy and that care for not just a business, because it's not a business. It's people's homes, it's their safe places, it's where they kind of are to be comfortable. So yeah, the whole industry needs to be able to share that ideal, isn't it? And things. So we're just bit curious. This is a conversation that me and John had the other day about how the algorithm works. I'm not asking you to say, right, this is the algorithm, here it works, and now give me the KFC recipe or anything like that.
That's good because it would bore you to tears. But
But just curious, we've sort of mentioned that some places that there might be a term that's used to be, well, that's brilliant and that's great, whereas another region, it's a case of that just means that's okay. How do you train something to sort of go, this means this here? Does it understand different nuances? Does it understand dialects? Does it understand all those bits? Or is it something that, if you've got that human in the loop that then needs to double check it at the end of the day?
absolutely. So yeah. So first of all, yes, always a human in the loop. Um, we are really, really conscious of the dangers of using AI models for this kind of thing. Um, these are well chronicled. The fact that if you ask an AI something today and then ask it again tomorrow, it will give you a completely different answer. The fact that it does hallucinate, it does go wrong. Um, I've heard that, and this is a lovely example of language evolving, but apparently school kids are now using AI just to mean lie. Like if you said, "Oh, I've got a girlfriend, she just goes to a different school," the kids would go, "Oh, that's totally AI." It's become to mean false. Like that's what that means now. Oh, you're talking AI.
Right.
Um, uh, and like I think that concern is really legitimate. And so, in terms of kind of how it's working in the background, what we're actually doing is, as the user, you're sort of a bunch of people have trained up these themes as what we call themes. As a user, it's almost like a Gen AI kind of interface. So, kind of what you'd be familiar with ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot or any of those. In the background, it's much more rigid machine learning algorithms that are actually then categorizing the data. So we're pulling together two different kind of methods of organizing the data, which are then kind of checking each other. But there is still checks done by human beings in order to ensure that the accuracy is as good as it possibly can be. The system also checks itself and alerts a person if there is something it's concerned about. Um, it will never be perfect. I think, there is no perfect way of doing this, including getting a human being just to go through and tag every single thing. That will also lead to, there will also be mistakes in that. But in answer to your question about the differences between different parts of the country, but and all that kind of colloquialisms and misspellings and all this kind of stuff that can confuse the meaning. Um, the best way um, uh, of, of mitigating for that is not just to have one way of approaching it. So we use Gen AI. We also use machine learning. We also use at the back end linguistics. So then we use the actual structure of the language, the way in which the words are interacting with each other to kind of group the data that way as well. And having those combination of things allows one to pick out the mistakes in the other. But that loop absolutely should have a human in it. And if it doesn't, then that is dangerous for all the reasons that I'm sure you're aware.
robots taking over the world.
Robots, as you so rightly say, taking over the world. I hope they will treat me with mercy because I work with them.
That's fair enough. I'm sure that totally counts to robots
I'm
and what
sure
they're going to
it's
do going forward.
very loyal, the robot. That's exactly.
Yeah, nothing to worry about. We're just going to have cars driving us
Uh,
around with no drivers and all sorts.
it's
So,
going to be great. I think it's interesting though, because like when we say robots taking over the world, the robots are just doing what people are telling them to do. Like the fact
mm,
that your social media is absolutely awash now with AI slop of just nonsense images and all that kind of all the horrifying stuff that Grok's been accused of doing, all that kind of thing. This is all stuff that's it's been asked to do by a human being
mm,
and has then gone off and done that. And so I think the and I know the kind of cliche about your job isn't going to be taken by AI, it's going to be taken by somebody using AI. But also, yeah, I mean, I think this is doing really is magnifying um, and multiplying what you are doing already. So when you train something to go through your data and look for any mention of, damp and mold, regardless of
mm,
how the person's described it, that allows you to check more of the comments than you could otherwise. But putting in that time at the start to ensure that it knows what it's looking for and
mm.
having those guardrails in place, that's where you get good AI. But there's always a person there telling the AI what to do, in the best and the worst kind of examples of AI
Yeah.
that we're seeing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that brings us actually nicely on to another point that I was going to speak to John about in regards to some sort of, I'm not going to say issues, but more perceptions of what people are doing with them. So we have released some new KPIs a couple of months ago, and it's all to do with Awaab's law, which, if you're not familiar, it's to do with making sure that properties are better and safer for tenants. And it's being done in phases. So the KPIs we've launched cover a few different things, including emergency hazards. Now, the perception that people have got is because Arab's law was so heavily involved around poor living conditions to do with damp and mould, that emergency hazards, people have essentially concentrated on damp and mould rather than everything else. John, do you want to just sort of talk to what we've had from the data so far and the kind of areas we need to improve on?
Yeah, so I mean, Arab's law is this piece of secondary legislation that relates to the Social Housing Regulation Act from a few years ago, um, and it's quite complicated. But if you look at it from a tenant's point of view, it says, right, okay, these things will happen at these stages, and if it doesn't happen, then you can you've got some kind of comeback on your landlord. It's not like the right to repair where you could claim £50 compensation or appoint your own contractor to do it. But it does mean that the landlord gets a kind of mark against their name if they don't meet these particular timescales. But when you try to aggregate that up, you start to see the difficulties in the regulations that are sitting behind Awaab's law. So, for example, there's four different types of investigation that you can do, and there's four different timescales, including a timescale that's as soon as practicable. So, how do you know if you've met the timescale because it's just as soon as practicable? And then there's the timescales are a mix and match of calendar and working days. And then beyond the investigation, you start to look at, well, when does the work start? So there's the same time scale to say, right, you've got to make safe significant hazards, but then you've got another time scale that says you've got to take steps to start the supplementary preventative works to stop the hazard recurring within 5 working days. And the first one is the make safe within 5 working days. So you try and record all of this as a landlord, and it starts getting quite confusing. And then you've got the issue that you highlighted, which is the publicity around Arab's law has been chiefly about damp and mold. And phase one for significant hazards, so the sort of the slightly less bad hazards, um, has only been rolled out for damp and mold. But then we've got the emergency hazards, which covers all 29. So it could be hygiene, it could be slips, trips, and falls, it could be collisions, it could be ergonomics, all these kinds of hazards that could be identified as an emergency should be included. And the data that we're getting for the first couple of months is just not showing that. It's just showing far fewer. It even says in the guidance, which sort of sits on top of the legislation and is a bit tricky to sort of work around, but it does say that emergency hazards should be treated pretty much the same as emergency repairs. But we can see we've got emergency repairs from regulatory TSM data, and we know that the volumes are nothing like the same. So it's really difficult. Um, and we're having conversations with landlords, and they're saying that they they're not fully prepared for it, let's say. And we know that lots of landlords aren't submitting data to us because they don't quite trust it, and it's all a bit experimental at the moment. So kind of hope that things will improve, but it'd be really interesting to see how the rollout of our Awaab's law then affects things like satisfaction scores, both transactional and perception satisfaction scores going forward.
Hmm. No, definitely. And I think it'd be something that think would be interesting, as you say, to look at. And I guess, is perception something that you ever have had to sort of struggle with what you do, Steve, or in regards to how people perceive? Like we've had the issue with the perception of what's gone into the KPIs and what's used.
Absolutely. I think it's such an interesting area because um, there was we do a little work with National Highways, and in the first meeting with them, um, their kind of head of customer experience said, "We know if our customers are safe. If they're on the road, we know, like, we've got sensors, we've got things checking the tension of the road and all this sort of stuff. We know if they are safe. We don't know if they feel safe, and those two things are not the same. They're kind of subtly different to each other. And so I think understand, particularly as you say, that like with some of the Awaab's law um, categories, some of them, I mean, it kind of is only in the customer's head as to whether or not this is an actual thing. And then obviously you are then required to, if the customer mentions it to you, a clock starts ticking at that point. And that, so I think that that ability to understand and recognize different types of how customers are perceiving different things, that's kind of huge across all of the stuff that we're doing, because so much of what we think of as customer experience, you actually can't see out in the world. It is just how that customer is feeling about that situation. And I think we're as the and I think they've obviously started with some of the more unequivocal ones, but I think even, the when we talk about emergency, what is an emergency? Um, is the customer the ultimate judge of whether this is, because it feels like an emergency to them.
Mm.
So understand, so the nuance in that is, I think, a real challenge for housing associations, but I think you can support that by having systems and checks and balances in place that are looking for this kind of thing and ensuring that as the clock starts, so you're getting that information and that you're getting it to somebody that can do something with it as quickly as possible. I think that so there's a lot of challenge in there.
Yes, I think with some of the emergency hazards, it is kind of black or white. Your boiler's working or it's not working, or the electrics have gone or they're not gone, they're partially gone, and but with something like damp and mold, I mean, how do you know that it's an imminent risk of harm and therefore an emergency, or just a, a significant risk of harm? And then how does a tenant convey that? Probably over the telephone or maybe in a video call. Do they kind of show like their phone and say, "Look, it's up there in that corner," kind of thing? It's really, and then the contact center agent then has to make a decision, triaging that and say, "Okay, well, on the basis of what you've told me and what I understood, it's an emergency or it's significant." And there's all these scripts that landlords are producing to try and help their staff to identify these particular hazards, and what category to put those in. But that's just really looking at damp and mold at the moment. And you try and rolling it out across all of them,
Yeah,
it's mind boggling.
absolutely. And then to your point, Ali, about the fact that there are some slightly more stoic parts of the UK versus others, you know, it to what extent to some extent you have to judge how big an issue is based on how upset the customer feels, based on that is likely to be. So how do you then kind of correct for that? How do you? So there's within that kind of idea, which I think is a great idea, and obviously coming from a really kind of coming from a really positive place, there's so much nuance there, and I guess it's going to be a little while before we fully understand exactly what that nuance will be. But casting your net wide at this stage would seem like a wise starting point.
But just when you're saying about the stoic parts of the country, I was thinking, what about because we notice quite a lot of regional differences, for example, but really the big one we see, and it's been written about a lot over the years, is that London versus not London. How did you allow for that in your work?
It's a great question. We have London and not London housing associations within the 18. Within the report, we didn't do any direct comparison on region because we felt that might get too identifying. We wanted to ensure that at no point is any of either the housing association or any individual customer of the housing association, at no point is any of that identifiable. I think it's a really interesting area more broadly, and absolutely you see differences. The differences and they do stack on top of each other as well. So we did break it down by housing association size. So we had by number of homes. So we had very small, which I think was we had small, sorry, which I think was below 5,000 homes, and then going up to over 25,000, which was extra large, I think we call it. But yeah, so we looked a little bit at what the differences are there, but obviously, I think expectations and understanding of your housing association, if you think of it as this monolith rather than if you think about it as this group of people that can be. So there's lots of different factors that you can take into account there. And I think what we'd love to do is to, this is I think the first year we're really hoping to do this again. And I think the more housing associations that we bring in, the more we can do that kind of stuff. But there's some fascinating stuff out there. There are countries, I think Italy's one, where they just don't give 5 stars in reviews. Like it's just not done. Like it's and then how do you then judge that with and so there's all these kind of different things that you're trying to unite and bring together.
I think we've come across that with our customers. You've got a customer base that's full of analysts, and you try and get a net promoter score from them, and they're like, "Well, I never give higher than an 8.
Yeah.
If it's an 8 out of 10, I don't give 8." And yet the methodology says you're passive.
Yeah.
We can't include you in that. You're excluded from the figures on that one because you never say that you're delighted. In that way.
NPS is a particularly interesting one because of the way the question is phrased of, would you recommend this to a friend? And you do always get a bunch of people saying, no, I wouldn't recommend. What conversations do you think I'm having with my friends that would be kind of recommending housing associations to them? And that kind of, you always get a few of them as well. So it's very much how they take the question, how they kind of, so there's lots going on there. I think the best that I would recommend doing is just let them talk. And that's why we try and bring together complaint emails and all call transcripts and all that sort of stuff, because customers are weird and they will give you something really positive about staff in the middle of a complaint, and they will tell you about a vulnerability you weren't aware of in the middle of a review. And so bringing together all your data and trying to and then kind of looking for patterns in that allows for the most opportunity for customers to say what they want rather than having to follow through, a pattern like that.
And I guess because we've got AI now, that's much easier to collate than before, when you might have to manually read through and use some kind of coding frame for it.
Absolutely. I think so. I mean, the coding frames that you need now for something else. I mean, we spoke about Awaab's law, and that's another 29 things that you need to break the data down into. I think there's 272 different themes within the framework that we put together, and I'm sure that there are things that we didn't think of. Um, like I think, yeah, I think that it would be impossible to get a human being to go through and tick something into 272 different categories. And yeah, like I said before, there are flaws in all these kind of different options of doing things, but I think that's one of the big strengths is that it's scalable, and you can then start to look at all your data, and that becomes a possibility.
Mm.
No, definitely, and that was something we were curious about as well. As you say, with the 18 landlords, even though you've got over 135,000 responses, in the grand scheme of it, against the whole of the social housing sector in the UK, it's only a small number. So whether it was comparable or not, really, it was just curious to hopefully it can be done again, and as you say, on a bigger scale, as well, just to help with things. And I suppose it kind of brings it a little bit into what we looked at with digital contact as well for this month, and seeing what customers seem to be doing. Well, what industries seem to be doing actually is they seem to be coming back away from this. Chatbots are great, and online things, that's brilliant and that sort of stuff. But actually, customers are going, no, I want that human back. I want that person to speak to. Um, or you need to balance the efficiency with the human relationships, which hugely important in social housing. There's a part in the this month's pulse that talks about how the hospitality does it really well, and they call it superhuman or something, or superhuman intelligence, because they blend the AI in with like that face-to-face customer service. But what are the other bits that I'm missing in regards to what we've covered in digital for this month?
Yeah, so I suppose with digital contact is it's not rising that quickly, so over the course of sort of 3, 4, 5 years, it's maybe risen about sort of 4 or 5 percentage points as a proportion of all overall contact. So the telephone is definitely still the kind of the king of contact in terms of like tenants wanting to get in touch with their landlords. So you need to kind of think about that as a preference, I think. And I think landlords that are doing well are understanding the preferences as well as the needs of their tenants in terms of contact. So they're understanding whether a tenant like prefers written contact or text or some kind of digital version, or whether that tenant prefers to use the telephone or maybe prefers in person. They want to have visits, they want to actually speak to a human being face to face. But it's understanding that and it's getting the data on that that we're not quite seeing across the sector at the moment. What we are seeing though is I think there's a stat in Pulse that says like was it 1% of a survey said that people prefer to use a chatbot. I don't think anybody really likes to use a chatbot. Maybe if they believe that it's a real person, or it could go either way. If they believe it's a chatbot, they won't be as happy with their transaction as if they believe it was a real person they're speaking to. And then you've got the delay. You kind of like tap out a question and it takes the chatbot a minute or two to get back. So something that could have been dealt with very quickly in a telephone call just doesn't happen in the same way. It's not as responsive. So, yeah, it's a really difficult one. And then some people in the sector say, why can't we be like Amazon? Everything's online, and but housing associations don't have sort of Amazon's resources to be able to sort of put into digital contacts and make a decision. Okay, well, as a customer base, you will be pushed down this particular line when you've got regulations saying that you've got to base your communications on the needs and preferences of your tenants. So you can't really have that kind of Amazon approach to customer service because you've got tenants that are saying we don't want that, and you've got the regulators saying we don't want you to do that. So it's quite a difficult sort of nuanced approach, and maybe hospitality is a better example for landlords to look at rather than big sort of online retailers.
No, very true. And I think sort of just going back to the point you mentioned before, Steve, with um, when it was customer feedbacks and the recommendation, as you say, people, you can't really recommend the landlord because if you want to live somewhere, the landlord is the landlord. It's not like with you move into a house, you can have British Gas, you can have Eon or whoever's still around in regards to utilities as well. It's that difference of choice. So does that perhaps make it harder for social landlords? I mean, that's a bit of an open one to both of you. I don't know what your opinion is because people are so restricted. Is it sort of tough? This is the service, so does that make an influence on it as well? Or
No, I was just thinking, does it have parallels then with other public services or even like utilities where you don't get choice, like water?
Mm.
Do you have any sort of cross reference points?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, for water, which is sort of similar area in terms of is highly regulated, and there are things that you are expected to that they are expected to report on in terms of survey and that kind of thing. But it is private companies, and obviously they have also had these um, big issues with kind of publicity with things going wrong on quite a public level. Um, I think the uh, in terms of what can kind of be learned from those other sectors, I think the challenge that you've always got is you you with your water company, you don't think about your water company unless something goes wrong. It's, you don't think about all the times you turn the tap on and the water came in. But as soon as it doesn't, then the water company become the most important people to you in the world. So actually, a lot of the people that have a strong positive opinion about their water company are the people that have had an issue with their water, because then the water company has its chance to shine. Um, and I think the you're absolutely right to say, because of the fact that no one's choosing their housing association based on their preferences for whether they prefer chatbots or human beings. They get what they get, and then but figuring out which of those elements are the ones that will actually impact on their customer experience, impact on the scores that they give, impact on um the how happy they are in their homes. I think there's a lot that can be done to understand that. But the difficult thing about this is that you are in a way supposed to be, a kind of a silent partner in their lives. We talk a lot about landlord visibility and, being um, customers being aware that they're there and that they have that they can contact them and that kind of thing. I think oftentimes digital or analog, it's about knowing where to go and how to kind of work, and that's true across all of these kind of regulated industries, because they won't think about you until something goes wrong. But then when something goes wrong, you are the most important person in the world.
no, definitely. I think that's probably something that we're seeing a bit of as well. Um, was there anything else that you wanted to cover in regards to what we've seen this month, John? I know we covered a little bit on orders and lettings as well, and what's going on with that time frame, and then we also covered on rent. And obviously today, we've had the news about what's happening with rent conversions and rent for landlords this week, and how that's going to affect tenants, and potentially how it's going to affect landlords as well from what's been decided.
Yeah, so with the voids and lettings, I think that again comes back to Awaab's law. I mean, we've known for well, several years that voids and lettings, well, void periods have not improved. It's been really difficult to let empty properties. The pandemic just sort of seemed to throw out of whack a very finely balanced system of lots of different parties getting involved at lots of different stages to make a property ready, from a tenant moving out to a tenant moving in again. And we're still at that kind of 6 7 weeks turnaround time, when 2018 2019 we were looking at it being sort of 3 to 4 weeks. So there's a real impact there that we're just not quite sure about, apart from say lots of different things are going wrong. There's no one thing that you can fix that will improve everything. And now we're seeing with Awaab's law, there's if you can't fix the hazard within the time, and you can't fix that hazard, you've got to offer the tenant alternative accommodation, or in housing jargon, a decant for them. So we've now we're now hearing about landlords that are holding properties for Awaab's law decants, rather than letting them for temporary accommodation or letting them to new tenants. They're sort of holding them back as empty properties within their portfolio, which means they can't collect the rent, which means they don't have as much income, which means you'll probably see it in things like void loss, or it will be sort of money shuffled around from different budgets to sort of cover the period that it's being held for the decant. And then if you do have Al's Law tenants in there, or tenants that have been moved because of the hazard in their property, they can't pay rent on two different properties, and you wouldn't want them to anyway. So you've got the issue of them paying rent on their property that can't be lived in, it's not habitable. But then they're using another property that could be housing another household. So we're not sure how far this is going to go, but if overall empty property rates rose to, they're about 1.1% at the moment of all stock, to 1.5%. That could be like 20,000 extra homes that are being held empty because of Awaab's law. So there's quite a big implication there, both in terms of waiting lists, but also in terms of void loss and expenses, lost rent, that kind of thing.
And potentially what the tenants think about as well. If they see homes empty, they might not realise it's not, it's not advertised this is being held
Yeah, that's
decent,
true.
is it?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what is that going to do to the
Of
perception
course,
of?
yeah, the neighbours, yeah, they might sort of worry that, so if it's a whole block, is that block going to be demolished or something? Is it being held for some other kind of reason? Is it going to be held for a different type of accommodation?
And also potentially a safety aspect. I mean, there's times that previous job, when we were demolishing a block of flats, it had to obviously be emptied, but that meant that the block then sat empty. Well, unfortunately, that was broken into because people were after copper and boilers, etc. So then it puts the surrounding neighbourhoods and tenants under that concern pressure of, well, what's going to happen
Uh,
with my property, and if it's empty, does it make it more likely that people are going to find out? Is there going to be more crime in the region
Mm.
and things as
And of
well?
course, you get squatters in there.
Yeah.
That just pushes it like further down the line, and while you get the squatters out, so it is truly empty. It's absolute, really difficult situation.
Well, any thoughts on the rent conversion?
Well, it wasn't what the sector wanted.
Yeah.
So the sector wanted £3 straight in, and the actual standards come out, and it's a pound in a bit, and then £2 further down the line. So it's a bit of a fudge there. So we're going to be looking at that in more detail and trying to sort of put some numbers together. I'm sure that there'll be various trade bodies and consultancies that will be looking at the same thing. So we'll be keeping an eye on the trade press and what's going on there, and who's saying what, and what it's likely to mean for the sector as well.
And thank you everyone for listening and watching us today. I hope you enjoyed that all. And what we would love you to do is go to our YouTube channel, where you'll find this podcast and our previous ones as well. If you could give them a like, if you could subscribe to the channel, firstly, it updates you on when the next one's coming and what's coming, so you get all the info straight away. If you can also go to our LinkedIn page and give us a like and sharing posts. We put a lot of information on our LinkedIn as well about what we've got coming up, webinars and other really interesting events we've got going. That'd be great. And visit our website, which is housemark.co.uk. And I'll see you all next time.